That's 12 times, between 10 and 12 times the range of Storm Shadow, and nobody can tell the Ukrainians not to use it. Now, you will know better than me. How stealthy is it? How fast does it fly? And of course, these factors are all very, very important in how easy it's going to be for the Russians to intercept it and shoot it down.
Yeah.
But, they're talking about going into mass production on it. It's very exciting indeed.
Do you think Donald Trump's lost complete credibility because he's threatened Russia if Putin didn't come to the table in Alaska with a peace agreement or a ceasefire agreement, then he was going to sanction Russia and secondary sanctions against all those that are buying goods from Russia, including oil and gas products. But he hasn't done any of it. Has he lost total credibility in the world stage?
Yeah, Philip, let me be blunt. He has lost total credibility, and it's time finally for the scales to fall from the eyes of leaders in the democratic West. And in Canada, I don't think there are many scales on Mark Carney's eyes, but certainly some of our European leaders still act like they don't quite want to face up to reality as it is. Europe is very much on our own. And, I always think of that saying that 600 million Europeans need 330 million Americans to protect them from 140 million Russians who can't even defeat 40 million Ukrainians. And as you know, we have if we put the UK and other non-EU countries in with the EU, we have a combined economy which is over 10 times that of the Russian Federation.
Yeah, and that economy should be able to produce defence capability to support Ukraine and to build up the defences that we need in Europe. But Ukraine is doing very well by itself, and you said you recognises that it's almost isolated, but with a little bit of support from Europe and this coalition of the willing. And one of the things that is a symbol of Ukraine's innovation and seems to be threatening Vladimir Putin in a big way is the unveiling of this new Flamingo cruise missile, which I understand, a funny story, that it was called the Flamingo because the prototype that was put out was painted pink by accident. Whether that's true or not, I don't really care, but we've got it out there, so you've heard it on Times Radio. But what do you make of the optics around what Ukraine is developing from a weapons perspective? What do you think the Russians are making of it?
Well, I think if the Flamingo is everything it's cracked up to be, it's very exciting indeed. And just to remind listeners, the go-to cruise missile that the Ukrainians were gifted first by the Brits and then by the French was Storm Shadow.
Yeah.
And Storm Shadow has a warhead of about half a metric ton, and a range of about 250 to 300 kilometers. The Flamingo has a warhead in excess of a ton and a range of 3,000 kilometers. That's, let me do my maths, that's 12 times, between 10 and 12 times the range of Storm Shadow, and nobody can tell the Ukrainians not to use it. Now, you will know better than me. How stealthy is it? How fast does it fly? And of course, these factors are all very, very important in how easy it's going to be for the Russians to intercept it and shoot it down.
Yeah.
But, they're talking about going into mass production on it. It's very exciting indeed. And I've been hearing rumours of this sort of these sort of developments for some time, and I've not spoken about them because I didn't feel it would be correct to, and I didn't have any evidence in the public domain. But it's very, very exciting. What do you think, Philip, in terms as a military man? What do you think of how is it going to stack up against other cruise missiles in terms of its capability?
In terms of capability, if we look at it from a warhead perspective, it's better than most other cruise missiles. It's got a bigger warhead. Range perspective, it's got a bigger range than most other cruise missiles. The thing that lets it down is it's not stealthy. And it's a cruise missile, so it flies subsonic, or sub-ballistic. It's not a ballistic missile in any way, shape or form. So it actually flies around, and therefore it's more easily shot down. But I don't think there's any accident why Ukraine is systematically destroying all of the air defence radars across Crimea and air defence systems across Crimea between where the launch sites would be, say, and the Kerch Bridge. Because 1.15 tons of high explosive hitting, or several of them hitting key points in the Kerch Bridge would have a massive impact. And of course, I think we've seen it being targeted at Russian oil and gas industry at very long ranges, and again, it is having a massive effect there. And it is a symbol of Ukrainian innovation, and they're innovating across the board with lots of things. But again, from a messaging perspective, I think Ukraine is very clever. One of the pictures that I saw coming out with the launch of the Flamingo missile was you could see chalked on the side of two of the missiles numbers. And one of them was 178, the other was 179. And there's a lot of speculation that that's what they have in production. That was missile number 178, missile number 179 being produced. Do you think the Ukrainians are playing the information game? Do you think
I was just going to say, what's that word that you're very fond of? Maskirovka. Maskirovka.
Yes.
And maybe they're playing the Russians at their own game here. I really don't know, and I shouldn't know.
Yeah.
I obviously, as a friend of Ukraine, I am quietly excited. Mm-hmm. I look forward to see what they can do with it. It's interesting. At the beginning of the war, I said already that we always gave them, we always gave Ukraine too little, too slowly, and when we did give it to them, we tended to put handcuffs on what we gave them. Certainly in terms of long-range munitions, it's interesting. We started off by just giving them lightweight anti-tank weapons, which probably saved Kyiv in the early days of the war, and we very, very slowly, and I remind everyone, the Brits broke the logjam initially with 14 Challengers. The Brits later that summer in 2023 broke the logjam with Storm Shadow, and the Brits were, although we don't use the F-16, I know, working very, very closely with the Dutch and others, were instrumental in breaking the logjam with giving them F-16s eventually. But what's very, very interesting, and it doesn't get any attention, is the amount of Ukraine is probably now producing around 40% of the weapons that it's using, which is far, far more than it was producing at the start of this war. We know there is considerable investment from various Western countries going into Ukraine's armaments industry, and this is all going to replace the deficit which is going to arise from America, because we've heard that America won't give them anything anymore. America will sell it to the European Union, but actually we still don't know the details of what we're actually going to get from the United States. And of course, there's the other big question. Donald Trump has boasted that when he sells the best weapons in the world to allies, he will downgrade them by 10%, because our allies will not always be our allies. And there have been, and you again will know much more about this than me, there was concerns of does America retain the ability to literally switch off weapon systems? So there's got to be a huge amount of concern and skepticism going forward of anything coming out from the States. I think we have to realise that between actually Europe, including Ukraine, and maybe one or two allies like the Canadians and a few others, we have got to replace what America is doing as fast as possible. You and I have discussed this before. The problem is there are certain gaps that we cannot currently fill that are provided by the States.
But there are companies that are working on filling those gaps from a technology perspective. And no, the Americans can't switch off the weapon systems. They can interfere with or stop access to other systems. So the F-35 fighter was something that people have talked about. The Americans, all of the data for the logistics, their smart fighters, they tell engineers what's gone wrong and they automatically order the spare part. That data is held in continental United States. And if the US restricted access to that, there isn't another easy mechanism to set that up, and other countries would have to do that, but they can't switch it off. The other thing, especially with the Storm Shadow and the Scalp missile, that's British-French cooperation, is a guidance system in it uses not normal GPS, it uses the military GPS. The military GPS is a US capability that is what's called NOTAR controlled, and therefore the Americans can switch off access to that, and that gives it a high level of accuracy and stops it from being able to be jammed. But the Ukrainians are developing their capability whilst the Russians are relying on North Korea and China and Iran for a lot of their capability. Do you think we're seeing a sea change in that Ukraine is on its way up and Russia clearly can't meet the bill itself?
Yes, I definitely do, without a doubt. And one of the interesting things to remember that I learned when I was over there, in fact, the foreign minister who I worked for, Pavlo Klimkin, I was chatting to him one day about how he got into diplomacy, and I knew he had an honours degree in maths and physics. The man was a rocket scientist. Most of the rocket expertise that drove the Soviet space program came from Ukraine.
Yeah.
There was so much of the Soviet Union was based in Ukraine. Up to 40% of the economic output of 15 Soviet socialist republics came from one Soviet socialist republic, that of Ukraine.
Yeah.
There, of course, they have the breadbasket of the world status with their incredibly rich black soil. They have and I saw it when I was out there, they're gifted with incredibly talented technicians, but certainly the rocket industry is one area that Ukrainians have a lot of expertise.
Well,
so I think they're doing well.
I think they are, and I have to agree with you. And on that positive note, Cormac, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today on Times Radio Frontline.
It's always a pleasure, Philip.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.